Matt, you and I have been through the wars. The pragmatic way to answer that question is we've seen this movie before, Total Quality Control in the 80s, ERP in the 90s. You and I did a lot of work on e-com and analytics in the aughts. And so this is a transitory life form. It becomes important.
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive impact by focusing on their customer experience and culture together. I'm really excited to have Steve Busby, founder and CEO of Revenue Operations Associates, and Stephen DiIorio, partner of Revenue Operations and author of the book, also called Revenue Operations, on the podcast today. It's great to see you guys again. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Matt.
Super excited to be here and reconnect, Matt.
We're going to have a lot of fun today. I'm super excited also, Stephen, to have read your book and write a review. People can find that on JourneySpark's website. Congratulations on the book. I've always enjoyed your writing, and I enjoyed teaming back in the day at PwC on that white paper we did together.
Yeah, you and I both love deep research, and that book is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of interviews, research, and nuggets in there. So congratulations on finishing it. It looked very well rested.
Yeah, well, it's a great cookbook for chefs who love the intersection of sales, marketing, and service. So it's well done. And I think the cookbook, you may not read it all in one sitting, but it's got lots of great recipes in it.
You can throw it at your boss and get budget. It's proven.
Okay, well, don't do that on the episode here. Steve, you helped create Revenue Operations Associates. Do you want to share a little bit more about what that is and what are some of the reasons why it's exciting and valuable for folks to dig in there?
Yeah, sure. And we have taken the position that RevOps is a critical and important discipline, but basically it's not being done correctly in its mature strategic state. So we are endeavoring to help companies improve go-to-market execution, very broadly defined, and we'll get into that, by doing RevOps the right way. And we focus on the two polar extremes. One is the very front end of what is my go-to-market problem? What is my revenue problem? Let's be honest, at all levels, from the board down to the front line, and then use that to prioritize and game plan and align and all the cultural things that are critical. We operationalize all that stuff through RevOps, and then on the very back end, when it comes down to brass tacks and execution, we do a lot of education and enablement things on training on the revenue cycle, so people know what the change is about. They know what is required of them, how the interdependencies with other functions, and it just helps the odds of success go up greatly when everyone's informed, educated, excited, aligned, and motivated.
So a lot of people on the podcast may know what revenue operations is. Some, I bet, don't. So they may know what marketing operations is or what sales operations is, or they may appreciate that marketing and sales and service are all part of customer experience. Give folks a quick definition of what is revenue operations.
If you haven't written the book, it's a good question, and it's subjective. Some people call it technology. Some people call it a trend, a fad. At the end of the day, it's a system. It's a system for growing your business, and organic growth is the number one driver of value in a business. Why do we call it a system? A system has a lot of moving parts that need to connect it. The human body, the government, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, obviously the operating system on a computer. One of the only things that's complex with a lot of moving parts that has not, until now, had a system is go-to-market. And you talked about those functions. Marketing operations lives at the front of the funnel, but CRM administrators have a lot of data. Customer experience executives live at the end of the funnel, but then you've got all sorts of go-to-market analysts, financial analysts, strategic response management professionals that live all over. In all, and this is in the class we developed, there are 12 discrete functions with associations, professional associations with membership of over 50 to 100,000 people that all fall into the remit of RevOps. And we like to tell a joke, what's the difference between sales operations and marketing operations? Well, it's kind of like a bad haircut. In 2 months, they're going to be the same thing, and it's all going to be merged. Same data, same processes, same content. So it's a moving target, super exciting. Some people are very, very deep into things like deal desk. Others are very broad in terms of enabling and training entire field forces. But at the end of the day, organizations have dozens or even hundreds of operations folks crawling along the revenue cycle that are making the go-to-market engine run. And so, we want to connect the people, process, technology, data, and finance that make that engine run. That engine has 35 gears. I'm going a little deep, but I get super excited about the more you think about growing as a system, the more you're going to grow and grow profitably and scalable.
I know there's a lot of detail you mentioned, but like if folks want to learn more about the assessment tools or around the curriculum, they can go to, you want to share the website? We can do a quick rollover of that, and then we can continue the conversation. Steve, what's the right URL people should go to if they want to check that out?
Busby, you take this.
RevOpsAssociates.com.
There you go. You can see it on the screen. If you want to learn more about the assessment tools, definitely reach out to folks. We'll share more, whether it's LinkedIn or you can definitely reach out over the website. And I should mention, I'm excited to have joined the faculty. So thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to collaborate on folks that want to dig in. And I'll also mention now, Stephen's generously offered the first 20 folks who reach out who are brand marketers that want to set up a Zoom meeting with us to discuss this. We're happy to send you a copy of the book, Revenue Operations. Over the years, we talked about different parts of the company. Over the years, the way companies build centers of excellence has evolved as they invest in capabilities that require cross-functional collaboration. So, we're talking about the marketing operations team, the digital center of excellence, the analytics center of excellence. Like, how has revenue operations connected to past efforts to build these centers of excellence? And I know in the book you talk about like 3 different models of the way the organization's evolved. So how do you see this building on the foundations that companies have in the past to go from where they were to where they're trying to get to?
That's a great question. And Matt, you and I have been through the wars. The pragmatic way to answer that question is we've seen this movie before, Total Quality Control in the 80s, ERP in the 90s. You and I did a lot of work on e-com and analytics in the aughts. And so this is a transitory life form. It becomes important. You stand it up as an initiative, but if ultimately it needs to be baked into the culture and roles of the business. But there's also an evolutionary standpoint. RevOps and the 12 job titles that we just discussed have become one of the fastest growing jobs in North America. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that growing a business has become a data-driven, you know that from our work together, technology-enabled. A third or more of what runs the modern growth engine is actually CapEx and technology and data that supports it, team sport. Steve is going to talk about 40 levers that you can pull to grow your business. Most people only know 2: fire your head of sales and beat up your head of marketing. But there's 38 others that we can talk about. Half of them involve teamwork. And what we like to say is RevOps is a team sport where the team that connects the dots the most wins. And so, for example, in your world, Matt, if customer success people are collaborating with account managers and marketing people to provide signals and feedback and opportunities for cross-sell, that's great. That's not their day job. But to the degree they do that and act like a point guard or a collaborator, they're creating huge value for the business. The last thing you talked about was, how do you run these things? I mean, you were there in the factory when they put up the Total Quality One banner. They created a data czar. Now we have cybersecurity czar. And at the end of the day, there's three ways to do this. One is the czar model. Put up a poster, assign a chief growth officer, give them a big remit, probably a very thin remit, and manage it from the top down. Folks like General Stanley McChrystal say that doesn't really work that well. It maybe works in Russia, but it may not work that well in a corporation. The other, and the most practical one, is a coalition. Like any good sports team, any good management team, any good family, there's a coalition. You don't think about your jobs. You just do what's right. You don't think about sharing credit or budget. And so the best teams are marketing, sales, customer success, finance, and product, all working together with IT to do the right thing to grow the business. Busby will tell you that takes a really deep understanding of the levers of growth and what it takes to grow the business. But organizations that intuitively or overtly understand those things work as a team. And the last model is the chief of staff, the Radar Riley model. Remember that show MASH? It's a little anachronistic, but the corporal who did all the paperwork actually ran the show because he knew where all the bodies were buried. He knew the processes, the data and procedures. And that's where we're seeing RevOps superstars. They're armed with data. They talk finance. They know how all these dots connect, and they could be hugely effective almost as a coach and chief of staff in educating folks. So the person best positioned for this is usually a RevOps person who is outgoing, talks to their peers, has data, and understands the math of growth. They get in the boardroom incredibly quickly, and they can be agents of change. So that's chapter 5 of our book. We'll make that available to your members, and as a really interesting way to think about things.
It's really interesting that your point about it being a team sport, and it's not just about the org structure, but the way people collaborate, the way people work together. I mean, this podcast is a CX and culture connection, and people who are a fan of the podcast, and I definitely encourage you to like and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't yet. Know that a lot of what we focus on is how you drive change by being sensitive to culture and evolving and stretching your culture to drive outcomes. So that's the connection, is the way your employees work together to deliver outcomes is reinforced by your culture through collaboration. You mentioned in a few models, like, in many cases, companies may have now a chief growth officer or chief customer officer or chief experience officer. Some of them have been on this podcast before. But they don't drive change necessarily just by grabbing stuff in the org chart. In some cases, bringing like sales, marketing, service together is part of their change remit. They might also change the way people collaborate, the way people drive behaviors, the way leaders engage, the way analytics are developed. So what you highlight is, regardless of the 3 models, org structure is not the only lever you can pull. There are many other levers you can pull to drive change.
Well, this is something that Steve Busby knows a lot about. He calls it the elephant in the room, culture change and change management. Steve, you want to weigh in here a little bit?
Yeah, just to build on the point about business being incredibly complex and getting more so, and over time, deployment of very talented specialists across the revenue cycle. But when you wake up and sort of look at it objectively about, are these people aligned? Are they connected? Are the objectives clear? Are we measuring them the right way, motivating in the right way? You find these major, what we call gaps or issues with the connective tissue. So the intent is there, but the evolution has created some structural flaws in the ability to connect the dots and execute as a team. So, what we look at in doing a ton of these at companies and lots of academic research, but really looked at what drives that desired output, right? The consistently hitting my numbers and growing at scale and all the metrics that the C-suite wants. And you go down a layer, and it's looking at, is the organization capable of change? Is there willingness? How aligned is the culture with the strategy? Look at the alignment dynamics between product and every function, between finance and every function, between leadership and the front line, between the KPIs. So, if you want to research, it's all available on our website if you want to look at the model, but it's always eye-opening when you talk to a board or a C-suite about this is the stuff that drives your outcomes. So you need to know how you're doing on this and get better if you want the outcomes. And I guess my last point, and it's a bit of a pet peeve, but most of us are sports fans, and any championship coach, they all talk about the process. What happens during the week of practice, sleep, teamwork, film, commitment, diet, all that stuff. And the results take care of themselves at game time. Business is just the opposite. It's always what's the results. And there's not a lot of, I would say, thoughtful measurement of all the input and process dynamics that enable that result. So that's what we're trying to do, is allow a normalized way for some of these intangible things. They're squishy. Alignment is not, you don't get that number from finance, but there's a methodology to sort of handicap it and normalize it and measure it across an organization.
What I'm excited to team about, and be on the faculty and help my audience and clients engage with you guys, is that they're on a learning journey. In fact, like the name of JourneySpark is a layered metaphor. Your customer's on a journey, your employees are on a journey, and your organization is on a journey. And we want to help create a spark of energy to help drive change on those journeys. Um, and if you think about the learning journey of your leaders and your organization, um, it's great now to have a set of resources and a network to tap into with the revenue operations to be able to accelerate that learning journey with a combined with a set of frameworks and tools and vocabulary people can use on their learning journey to apply and get better at revenue operations and engage your team members and push this down into the organization. So I think I commend you guys. I think it's really great that you've invested the time in building those resources and the network that people can tap into on those learning journeys.
Yeah. And the first, step in that spark, what it ignites, it has to be, my name is Steve and I have a problem. But the typical company will give you a financial explanation of the problem, of pipeline health, conversion rates, retention. That's the outcome of your problem, but you have not yet been honest about what your root cause problem is. You don't have the talent. They're not aligned. You don't have the systems. You don't have the processes. So what we're trying to do to spark exactly what, your good team does, Matt, is that honesty about the underlying, because unless you address that, you're going to just keep sort of treating the symptoms. And as Steve said, use the obvious levers of bringing in a new leader, deploying more technology, changing compensation, all that stuff, that necessarily is not a sustainable solution.
While we're talking about learning journeys, one thing I'll mention is that, sometimes when you're on the journey, you engage others in your company, or you can also engage people externally, like in the network with revenue operations. I'm going to mention also here, and folks on the audience have heard me mention this before. I help team with some folks on a set of mastermind groups. One that I'd love to run a quick video clip for a minute about those mastermind groups, and we'll continue the conversation on the other side. That's something you can get plugged into in addition to tapping into the resources of revenue operations associates to kind of continue the learning journey with other peers who are on the journey as well. So let's listen to the video about the mastermind groups, and we'll continue the conversation on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment, and with Greg Kihlstrom, host of the Agile Brand podcast, on a group focused on building a self-funding growth flywheel. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. I'm really enjoying our conversation about not only how do you define revenue operations, what is it, how does it evolve the capabilities and skills in the organization, but how do you actually drive, change in the organization around that and for leaders? What are some of the lessons learned and pitfalls for companies to avoid? How does the way companies approach culture and change management help navigate them?
Well, I got a ton of pet peeves here. I'll just put out a few and then I'll let Steve Busby comment. But one is most organizations don't understand the math of growth and the levers of growth. We had mentioned that the modern go-to-market commercial engine is, a data-driven, digital, capital-intensive, asset-intensive team sport. What do I mean by that? The things that drive growth are intangible assets, brands, customer data, relationship equity, digital channel experiences, things like that. Though we're not good. And you work for PwC. I fight with the head of FASB on this all the time. We don't measure those things on the balance sheet. The brand is worth 25% of a B2B firm, 20%. It's not on the balance sheet. No one even gives marketing credit for that. So the whole notion, the customer experience is an asset. Amazon built that. Do you really think you buy stuff from Amazon in the absence of that? Where does that show up on the balance sheet? They get it, but most people don't really get it. And customer experience is a CSAT score. You know this better than me, Matt. So one, people don't understand the asset intensive um, uh, nature of growth, including knowledge assets, know-how, selling know-how, product innovation. It's all IP. So that's one thing we're really bad about. Two, they don't understand the math of growth. They confuse a pipeline forecast or, some activation brand awareness metrics, some retention metrics as really giving you a picture of the growth, when in fact, the growth equity of a business is really driven by so many other factors. And there are 40 different levers that Steve's going to talk about that we evaluate. We can measure them in a financial way. We can go in front of a CFO and explain this is causal. It's proven academically causal of firm value, future cash flow, and growth. And so we're attaching hard financial numbers to what are really intangible things like the customer experience, like customer equity, like culture. And it's important because people are going to keep pulling these levers, cut the marketing budget, fire the sales force, hire more salespeople. There's 38 more levers in that business. And then finally, the math of growth. The way we measure performance is so productivity based, capacity growth. There's asset utilization. There's return on assets. There's a return on investment. We have no financial vocabulary to really measure or describe whether the growth engine is working, what versus saving free time and a CSAT score, which underneath that are all sorts of issues and opportunities that need to be unpacked. So I know I went on a bit of a jag there, but those are three reasons people don't talk about as to why we're not good at this.
Steve, any thoughts you want to add about like how to get executives aligned around the right outcomes and then drive that system of metrics into the practices of the organization?
Yeah, I would always advocate, again, that brutal honesty, but going down to the fundamental level. And there's so much smart decision making and analytics, but do you have the clarity? Do you have the conviction? When you really get honest with people at the front line that have to make it happen, do they like their job? Are they motivated? And there's a SaaS, non-SaaS, and obviously lots of different examples. But for many established companies, you don't have the engagement, the conviction, the drive, the excitement in order to put any change motion, on top of it with a high degree of success. And, a related example I use is, the advent of the CRO is great to say, let's put a revenue responsible executive across more of the revenue cycle. But when we ask the question, CRO, what are you accountable for? Well, revenue. Well, do you control everything that goes into the revenue equation? I do not. Well, how does that work, right? Let's talk about product, IT, compliance, other things that impact customer experience, retention that you don't control, but you have to influence. And what are the contingencies there? And then you look at a typical CRO job spec and it's brilliant sales leadership, sales management skills, but where's the organizational design stuff? Where's the operations? Where's the change management? Where's the IT skills that are the requisites for being successful in that job? So, I'm never surprised when, whatever it's the 14-month turnover mark happens, because a lot of this is just it's not set up correctly.
Could I echo that? I think it builds on a question you asked before. What's the best model for managing this? The czar model just doesn't work because no single executive in your organization owns more than 45 to 50% of these 40 growth levers. Marketing perhaps even owns more than other people, and finance owns some, product owns some. So it's absolutely impossible to have a remit, no matter how broad, as a chief growth officer, to really control all those levers. The problem is people don't understand those levers. So a coalition is really the way to go, but that takes a fundamental understanding of these 40 growth levers that Steve's talking about.
To geek out on this for a minute, what we're talking about here is the limitations of organizational structure as a lever to solve for organizational performance. So structure is one of several levers you can pull to drive organizational change, changing the design of the organization. People tend to gravitate to that as the dominant answer because they want to get more impact in the organization. They want to get promoted. They want to have more power. They want to fight over turf. An organizations swing back and forth with structure, but the research shows that structure is one of the least impactful levers to drive sustained organizational change. I'm not saying there's never value in designing organizational role clarity and designing the structure. It's just not enough on its own. And in fact, it can become a distraction if you do look at it, it's on its own. So what are some of the other levers you can pull? Well, you can look at the governance. You can look at how do you set up the right governance for decision making? You can look at, is there clarity around the behaviors you want in the culture, and are you getting the right behaviors? You can focus on, are you getting the right measurement of the right information sharing and the right metrics? And a lot of what you were talking about earlier is around just getting clarity on the system of metrics for revenue operations and visibility into them and collaboration with other people. So the reason why I focus on culture so much is because I find that reinforces the emphasis on collaboration, on decision-making effectiveness, on behavior in the organization, which is what's more important than org structure and driving change.
I'll build on that. And these are two topics I know you want to talk about: AI and learning. So one of the key missing aspects of this whole notion of the revenue cycle, they represent it as a funnel, a bow tie, customer experience. Great. It's a closed loop process. I'm an engineer. Nothing happens magically. The scientific method is a lot of trial, error, and experimentation. And at the end of the day, we'll never get it right in the go-to-market. It's how many at-bats do you get? How many cycles, learning cycles and adaptation cycles do you have? So one of the big issues that gets lost is this notion of continuous process improvement. How fast do you learn? How well do you learn? How well do you adjust? Because you can get 1% better every time. But if you're doing it on an annual cycle or not even learning, that's a problem. The second one is this notion of how well am I monetizing the insights and knowledge in my business. If you really talk to a sales rep, it's the sales engineers, it's the product manager. Who do you want on the sales pitch? Who do you want writing the RFP? It's the product managers, it's the field engineers, it's the experts and subject matter experts. That's between the ears knowledge. Plus all this data we have about customers. It's how well can we turn that knowledge into information that can be monetized, and codified knowledge is acknowledged by accountants like PwC as a financial asset. People don't get it. So when they think about AI, they think about managing data, cleaning data. It's about harnessing knowledge and monetizing knowledge. And there's 30 some odd ways to do that. And people don't think about things like that. So I really want to build on this point. And those are just two examples of things that really make a difference that not a lot of people are that focused on.
let's connect this to AI a little bit further. You brought that up, and I'm amazed that we're this far into the podcast before we really dive into AI.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But I spent a lot of time working with AI. But so a couple thoughts here. One is especially in a B2B, it's about expertise and trust, right? And how do you replicate the knowledge, expertise, and trust with AI that human beings have with each other? So like that is actually a really important challenge around your content, around your training, around your continuous improvement cycles as you're developing insights, is how do you leverage AI not only to develop insights, to deliver experiences that could be human to human augmented with AI insights, or it could be AI enables more self-service. But that's the challenge, is replicating the expertise and trust, and then creating a continuous feedback loop. So when you're putting in place revenue operations, the training, the behavior activation, and the feedback loop on how you're doing. Are you actually doing the behaviors you want to deliver that brand promise? This is where AI comes into play. There's so many opportunities to leverage AI for insights, analytics, automation, and training and learning.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that. One of my favorite classes in the RevOps certification is called Strategic Response Management. And by accident, uh, the purest and best knowledge in your business comes from responding to RFPs. Everyone's bringing the A game. The information is current. You're responding to real customer questions. And done intelligently, enabled by AI, you could harness almost all the knowledge, know-how, and innovation in your business in one place. What I'm finding is people are actually using, as a byproduct of the RFP process, a massive AI-enabled knowledge bases that sales reps. I was with Blackstone. Blackstone sells really complicated stuff. They won't let a sales rep talk to a customer for 6 months. They had some new person come in answering complex customer questions within a week because he stumbled into this RFP system that had all the answers using AI. That's just one example. But also that marketers go into that knowledge base to see if what's the latest messaging and what is correct. And so if you think about a benign process, now most B2B revenues come from RFPs and DDQs. It sounds stupid, but that's where the revenue gets driven. It's usually regarded as a back office process, but smart companies like Blackstone and others have actually mined that process to create this knowledge base that's being used everywhere. Sales training, it's accelerating the ramp of sellers. Tell me that's not a big driver. It allows anybody to answer a question with confidence and know that it's compliant, trustworthy, and the IT security guys are going to be happy. It allows product to push knowledge through the sales force to partners and fields. So that's just one example that seems so mundane and benign, where AI is locking enormous value that no one even sees. Everyone's talking about first drafts, process automation, replacing people, firing back office people. Fine. But you need to think strategically about that. And without that knowledge asset, AI is just going to be pulling from increasingly either commoditized or even risky information from the internet as content sources get locked down. So I went on a bit of a jag there, but that's just an example. Strategic response management that no one's even looking at. That's probably one of the biggest opportunities in front of people.
We could riff and go on for hours about the topics we're talking about, but alas, we don't have the time to do that together. Although I'm not yet Joe Rogan with a 3-hour podcast that people will listen to. So what I would like to suggest again, as I made the offer earlier, is we're happy to send books out to folks who set up a Zoom meeting with us. Definitely reach out to us, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of the book and set up time to talk over Zoom and continue the conversation and answer more of your questions. Stephen, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you? Is it over LinkedIn or email or on your website? What would you recommend?
All the above. We are Busby, RevopsAssociates.com. Find me on LinkedIn, and our contact information is on our website, along with lots of information about the drivers, the model, how it works. If you want to, get really, again, honest about what your challenges are and how do I solve them in a more grassroots, sustainable way.
And again, I'm pretty easy to find. If you Google me, you'll find really good cartoons, which are helpful. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn and on RevOps Associates. So happy to engage and educate anybody. And, we can share some of these classes and workbooks and chapters that we discussed.
I'm really looking forward to it. If anyone reaches out to me on LinkedIn to set up a conversation, and we'll get you a copy of the book. And thanks so much for spending time together, guys. I'm really excited to be on the faculty and collaborate. Thanks for sharing your insights. I know it sparked a lot of great ideas for me, and I'm sure it has for the audience as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.